Hello and welcome to another episode of Brand Retro. Today on the podcast, we have Randy Hall, who is the founder and owner of Fourth Gear Consulting and Leadership Gym. Randy, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing well, Mike. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, same here. So as we were talking about a little bit of this before we hopped on here, leadership is something that I think is super important just in business and in overall just daily life. I think there's a lot to learn there. I believe that leaders are readers. I think you can never stop learning, and just digesting, that kind of content, I think it's just good for a person, especially if you're in business. So talk to me a little bit about Leadership Gym and kind of what you do on that side of things, and how a guy like me, I'm working with a lot of consultants, a lot of outside contractors. I partner with other agencies. How do I take leadership and apply that to my business?
Wow, some good questions right off the bat, Mike. Leadership Gym it's interesting. You talked about leaders being readers and that need to constantly look at leadership from different angles, think about it in new ways, explore new skills associated with leadership. And that's kind of what we do at Leadership Gym. It really is the same concept of working out every week, working on yourself as a leader on a regular basis, because it's not something that just happens through experience. A lot of people think that it is. Well, I've been leading people for 20 years, so I must be good at it. But at the same time, we've all worked for people who've been in management or leadership for a while, and they're not very good at it at all, right? So we know that experience alone doesn't get us there, but progress does. And thinking about tools and resources and approaches to leadership that are consistent, that are repetitive, that are habit-based, can start to change the game for us as leaders. I hear a lot this concept out there of leadership style, right? Well, that's just his or her leadership style. That's just the way they are. And we do that with leadership where we wouldn't do it with any other kind of function. So if you hired somebody as a salesperson and they didn't sell anything, and 6 months later you go, wow, you've been here for 6 months, you haven't sold anything. Well, that's just my selling style. Well, that wouldn't be okay, right? And if we, in your world, marketing, but you're not growing my business at all, that's just my marketing style. Like, you'd never get away with that. But we do in leadership all the time, because people think of it as this personality-based thing rather than a series of tools and processes and repetitive systems that you can use to lead people in ways that help them be at their best and help them reach the kind of success that's important to them. So that was a whole lot there right off the bat, but that's kind of how I think about it.
If I could add something, I was just going to say that, like, if you want to go down the leadership style road, okay, but then you have to show me the results of that style, because it's all about the results. And when I was heavy into leadership and reading the books and had all the people kind of working within me, it was all about team retention, team happiness. Like, I was looking at all the metrics of my results as to whether or not I was doing a good job and whether or not I was a good leader. And that's, for my own personal growth, that's kind of what drove me to read every book I could get my hands on, to study John Maxwell, to study, it wasn't necessarily that I wanted to adopt everybody else's belief systems. It was about, how do I find something that resonates with me? How do I make that part of my everyday leadership? And then how do I hopefully improve my results as a leader so that I'm getting better at it? Because to your point, like anything else, leadership is just a title sometimes. It doesn't mean you're good at it.
That's exactly right. I have a role that means I should be able to lead. I may or may not have processes and tools and skills that allow me to lead well. And I love that you brought up engagement, because and I don't know that you used that word actually, so but that's kind of what you're talking about is my team at their best, showing up, contributing in ways that are meaningful to them, that are important to them, that lead to retention and, happiness and fulfillment and all those things. We're getting a little better at that. I mean, the word employee engagement as a term, I think, showed up in a book like in the early 80s. And until then, we didn't even think about it. If you go back to the 50s and 60s and 70s in management, it was just about compliance. How do I get people to do everything I want them to do? And now we get to think about commitment, which is very, very different. Do I have people showing up at their best? We could get away with compliance when we were running an old school manufacturing facility, right? I just needed people to put in a rivet or do a repetitive task over and over. And that was great work. but it didn't require a ton of engagement at the time. And so managers could just manage, right? Using carrots and sticks and incentives and punishments and those sorts of things. Doesn't work like that anymore. It's not about compliance of our people. It's about their commitment to the quality of the work, not just the execution of a repetitive task. We need to communicate more now. We need to think more completely about problems and solutions and clients and service and opportunities than we ever did in that world. And so a lot of the things that sort of fed into the 50s and 60s management styles, to use that word again, came from a French engineer who died in 1903. He sort of, and we wouldn't do anything like it was done in 1903, but we still lead that way sometimes because we are just looking for that compliance. Just do what I say rather than be your best here.
I think the deficiency of a leader and how they fall back on some of that old school leadership tactic that's where that comes from. And it's evolution of leadership. Like you talked about, there was a do what I say a mentality for a while. Then it was more of a teamwork thing. And like one of the things that I love is when people throw it out there of lead by example. Okay. In
Right.
concept, I agree with that, but that doesn't necessarily transcend from the leader to the people all the time, because very few leaders, they truly never live their brand. So if you're expecting people to be watching you for the cues and watching you for the example, you better be paying very close attention to what you're doing, because they're not going to miss a thing.
No, you're on stage. Yeah, that's exactly right. And to your point, leading by example is something that should be in the mix. Like you should be aspiring to be the kind of person you want other people on your team and show up in the way that you expect others to around you. By itself doesn't do anything. You can show up at your best, but if you don't work with teams to help them be at their best, coach in the right way, do other things associated with leadership in the way you communicate, the way you cause change to happen, the way you involve people in the work. Like if you don't do some of those things, doesn't matter. You can lead by example all day long. Now, if it's not in the mix, like you're telling people to be different than you're willing to be or try to be, you don't have to be perfect yet. I see people get stuck in that space where when I'm great, I can lead others to be there too. No, you can be on the journey too, but you got to be on the journey. You got to be doing some of the work that is improvement based if you expect others to.
I think for the best results, I mean, in my career, I've seen people that kind of lead or try to maintain the persona of what their leadership avatar is. And it's like, just know that people can see through that. And some of the best leaders that I've worked with are the ones who lead with humanity and authenticity. And like, they're like you said, they're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to be a team player, but there is a business at stake here. So we got to think about this. Somebody who's pulling all those things together and being realistic about it and just being a real person while they lead, those are the people in my mind that they command the most respect, and they absolutely get the best results, and people follow them. It doesn't mean you don't have to make the tough decisions sometimes, but if you let people understand that it's a journey for you as well, and that you're kind of keeping all these things in mind while at the same time you're trying to be who you are, they're going to understand. Where I think, like I said, if you are that cartoon character, that avatar version of what you think leadership is, they're going to sense that you're not, kind of portraying a one-to-one relationship with who you really are.
That's right. And in most cases, people won't tell you that they've seen through that. They'll just act accordingly because they have. And so the phrase I use a lot when I'm working with leaders is, look, you're not working with the documentary in terms of how your people think and you're working with the made for TV movie, because everything you see is edited for your consumption, depending on your role in an organization. Like, because there's risk associated with telling you the truth, especially if it's bad news. And not that people on purpose go lie to you. Maybe some do, but it's usually not the case. But they do sort of edit the truth a bit in a way that makes the conversation less risky for them if you're the boss or if you're that leader. And so you're working with limited information. I can't count the times I've worked with organizations where you're working vertically. I may be working with a director level and then a senior manager level and then somebody on that team. And the differences in how they perceive the people above them versus how the people above them believe they're perceived are so dramatic that it's almost astonishing at times. There have been people that say, "Oh, my people are always honest with me. I always ask for their opinion. I always engage them. We have a great team." I go talk to the team, and it's like, that guy's a cancer in our organization. He's so hard to work for, and he never ever like lets us come up with any ideas. If it's not his idea, it doesn't matter. It's amazing to me how stark the contrast can be sometimes between how we see ourselves or how we think people see us and how they really see us.
Yeah, I think you have to remember what it was like to be the non-leader, first of all.
Right.
And second of all, I think you have to remember that just that division of non-leaders versus leaders, you have to navigate that, because the day you go from the non-leader to the leader, you just change teams. And and I'll just tell you this quick story, but I remember when I first started leading a team of people, like I was one of the guys 100% until I made the switch, and just, it didn't bother me. It was just that I noticed it. All of a sudden it was like, I wasn't in on all the inside conversations.
No,
I wasn't always getting invited to lunch. And I was like, see, I haven't changed as a person, but I definitely can tell that I switched jerseys. I went from shirts to skins, however you want to say it. And I'm noticing it, that I'm getting treated different. And that for me was, it was just a good reflection point to be like, okay, I guess I understand, but I guess I also then want to figure out how to build that trust back, to open the doors of communication. How do I take this and learn from it to somehow apply it to better leadership?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Mike. And we trade comfort for influence when we move into a leadership space like that. Like, I'm not as comfortable with this group maybe sometimes, and that's more about me than it is about them, although they do treat us differently because of role, right? But I now have the opportunity to influence people in ways that help them become more successful than they would have been without me. And so that's a fair trade for us, as long as we understand we're making it. If our expectation is we're still going to be treated exactly the same, even though we get to control people's future and their lives and their salary and their promotions and all of those other things, their organizational narrative, like we have more influence over that, it's just going to change the dynamic a little bit. And that doesn't mean we can't be friends with people on our team. In fact, I've watched people do that exceptionally well. But you're right. It's a different approach. We have to have a bigger viewpoint in the organization. Sometimes we are stuck between what leaders above us want and what people below us want. And we used to not have to make that decision or be in that spot. And so it's a whole new way of thinking about our work and our opportunities, and the ability we have now to cause even more sort of success to happen in the organization and for the people.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I knew this before I started leading people, but like I would have people on my team or people in the organization talk about, like, I don't want to lead people. I don't want to. And I'm like, why wouldn't you want to grow? Why wouldn't you want to?
Isn't that the next thing?
Like it just seemed logical to me that everybody would want that. And then once I started leading people, I'm like, oh, I get why you don't want to do this.
Oh,
yeah.
Hard stuff.
Well, and for me, I guess you could call it a promotion, but I looked at it more of an opportunity to grow, but also like I just took on a lot more responsibility, because now I have people that are counting on me, whether they say it like that or whether they articulate it in that way. To me, I am now responsible, because every year I got to do their annual reviews. Throughout the year, I got to teach, I got to educate, I got to do these things to help them be the best that they can. And and to be honest, none of that was told to me when they said, hey, we want to make you a leader.
Where's the handbook? Yeah.
All they said was, hey, we want to make you a leader, and here's what we want you to do. And you'll get a 50-cent bump or whatever it was. And I'm like, okay. But none of that other stuff, like I had to figure all that out on my own. And because of that, I think I look at it a lot differently now than I ever did before. So I understand at least what it's like to be a leader, but I understand the people who don't want to be leaders as well, because it's a different animal. It really is.
It is. It is, and it's a very hard job. And about 70% of a human's engagement in the workplace is directly related to their manager or supervisor. And so when you think about the responsibility, to your point, that comes with that job, there's a lot of it. And a lot of what we do in organizations is try to help prepare people before they get in the role, to your point, because that sort of smacks you in the face when you show up there. And A, people are treating you differently. B, the expectations are that you control some sort of set of outcomes that you may or may not directly touch. You got to work through people in that way. And now you start to leverage your newfound authority rather than have a set of processes that you use to be a good leader. And that's where people get in trouble, is like, well, now I'm the boss, I get to tell you what to do. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Nobody gets up in the morning and comes to work and says, man, I hope somebody tells me what to do all day today. There are people that can get comfortable there, but nobody gets engaged by it, right? I can't wait to be micromanaged. That's what I'm hoping for today, right? Never shows up in anybody's mind. And yet that's the lever we pull. That's the set of tools we start to use first because we have it, because we didn't build the other ones. We didn't build good leadership guiding principles about how we lead change, how we coach others, how we influence through conversations. We didn't do those things. And so we're stuck with, we got a hammer and everybody looks like the nail sort of thing. So,
yeah. Yeah. One of the things I've always said too is, and I believe this, leadership is hard, but it's even harder when you care.
Yeah, that's probably true. We're better at it, I think, but difficulty doesn't go down, right? Like
because you're not missing the cues either. And that's where, so basically what I mean is I think even if you're just a button pusher, I'm just going to do what I'm told leader, you still took on more responsibility than being a non-leader.
Yes.
But if you're a leader that really cares about your people and you really want to see results and you really want to grow and you really want to live up to the responsibility, the expectation of those people that you're leading, now it's way harder. And
it is.
That's not a bad thing, but it's way harder.
No, fulfillment and difficulty are sometimes connected, right? So it is harder, but you get to create more impact as well when you lead that way. I had a leader just a couple of weeks ago who has been doing it for probably 2 or 3 years. And she's worked through this whole process of, I get to tell people what to do, to no, I get to lead people towards some definition of success that's better for everybody. And the different approaches around that. And she said, if I'd known leadership like this was this easy, I'd have done it earlier. And I asked her, I said, what do you mean by that? I kind of thought I knew, but I still wanted to hear her perspective. And she says, now we solve problems together. I don't have to have all the answers. Now people come to me with solutions, not just things that are broken and expect me to fix them for them. They've already thought about ways to fix it. Now I have a fully accountable team and we work at a much higher level of efficiency and productivity than we did before, with less what feels like pushing the rock uphill on my part, and that was how she was thinking about it. And so I think you're right. It is hard once we get those leadership principles to become habits, for this is just how we do things. It starts to, you get through that a little bit and it becomes easier on the other side sometimes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Cause I think if you can come out the other side of that cloud of smoke with,
right.
If you can build a culture of people that adopt your leadership style and look at, solutions, not problems. And if they can be team players, I hate to use the word easy, but it becomes a lot more streamlined, a lot more palatable as far as like the execution. And, I think back to kind of where I started when I first started leading people. I had a leader of my own, obviously, but I got stuck with him after just a few months because every conversation that we had, whatever issue I threw at him, like you said, it was either a hammer and a nail type approach, or it was a cliche response. It was, well, you know what so-and-so says. It's like, okay, but I don't know what to do with that.
Right.
And
thanks,
there was a time there where I would take those and I would try to do something with it. And maybe I would just go back to my office and just maybe feel stupid about it. Should I know what to do with that? Cause I have no idea what that wisdom that was just dropped on me, what I'm supposed to do with it. But it was at a certain point in that process, I just decided to take it upon myself. And that's when I started to just consume and digest leadership books and videos and And I didn't even really know what I was looking for. I was just looking for something more than what I was getting from my own leader. And what I
Right.
first initially realized was my own leader doesn't have all the answers. So when I go to him with these questions, he has no idea what the answer is. He's just trying
Yep.
to make me go away. So either I can keep playing that game or I can start to generate my own answers. And
Yeah.
that's essentially what I did. And I'm sure I made 1,000 mistakes, but over time, I eventually learned how to manage the process. And to your point, learn how to not necessarily have all the answers and that to be okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's very stressful to think you're supposed to have all the answers and supposed to have all the one-liners that people now, have a changed life because you delivered some wisdom to them. It doesn't work that way, but people get sort of crushed under the weight of thinking that's how it's supposed to work. And they don't develop other processes because they keep fighting that same battle. And just because I told somebody what I would have done or how I think they should do it, I haven't necessarily helped them get better at it. And that's where we start to win, is when we help people create capability. The metaphor I use a lot is and we've all been there probably if we have kids, so a kid shows up with homework and says, Dad, what do I put here? And I never just say, well, write down 12, son, and you'll get an A and that'll be good. I say, well, how do you think you might solve the problem? We think about why we operate differently in that space than we do at work sometimes, where our main objective is just speed. And to your point, I got to get through this task so I can get to the next one. And that might mean just telling this person what to do so they go away. But when I really care about their learning, their development, their growth, their capability, their own accountability for finding solutions in the organization, then I operate differently. And we've got to figure out what our habits are around questions we ask, ways we converse, ways we lead change, rather than our impulses. And that's what leadership really comes down to a lot, is my choice about what's my best way to have this conversation or interact with this human, rather than my impulse for what I feel like doing right now because of what's on my plate or how bombarded or stressed I feel. So we don't even do the kid thing very good if we're, thinking about a million other things, right? I've been there myself a ton, and I'm sure others have as well.
So let's pivot just a little bit and just talk about you, and you tell me if you disagree, but I feel like leadership can be applied to a lot of different aspects of life. You don't necessarily have to be directly leading people, but as a business owner or even somebody who works for a business, if you
Right.
can adopt some leadership traits and understand kind of that process or that game a little bit better than you did yesterday, your relationships, your partnerships, perhaps the
Sure.
people you're leading, perhaps even how you interact with somebody who's leading you could be vastly improved. I just think that not everybody's cut out for leadership, but I don't believe studying leadership is only for leaders as well.
Oh, I completely agree. In fact, leadership can happen from anywhere, in any role, just because somebody cares about having a positive influence. Like, that's really what it is. And so, because I get this question a lot, it's like, well, yeah, I got my team in a pretty good place, but how do I talk to my boss, right? Or how do I go talk to somebody else in another role who's, I view as above me in the organization? I was like, leadership doesn't care about direction. The same things you use to help have good conversations that cause people to think, that report to you, can be also pointed at anyone else in your world. And I can't count the number of times people come back after we've done a leadership workshop or we've gone through executive coaching with them, and they go, oh, wow, this helps me at home too. Like, I'm having a different conversation with my partner, or I'm having a different conversation with my kid, or I'm having a different conversation with my family. And it's like, because it's all human dynamics and it's all human behavior change and human influence. And that, if we use that and sort of the neuroscience of how that works, and then we connect it to routines and habits that we have as leaders that cause us to be able to do it well in the presence of another person, we win. And it doesn't matter. You could almost say, Mike, that all the stuff we do with humans in general now turn into leadership when we get authority or, purview over a team. It can go both ways. And so you're right. If we just learn to interact well and the processes that go with that because of how people's brains work, because they're human, then we can win.
Yeah. I just think there's such a massive, like maybe just the title of leadership doesn't even cover it, but I think there's just such a massive depth behind what studying leadership, self-development, those kinds of things can do for you. Because I'll be honest, had I not had the experience I had when I first started, I don't know that I would have dove into it as deep as I did.
Yeah.
But I also don't think I'd be where I'm at as a business owner or anything had I not done it. So
it's so true.
If I would have continued down that monkey see, monkey do leadership style, I would have been like everybody else. And I don't know that I ever would have evolved into anything different. And I say that knowing that I've got years in front of me, and I mean, I'm learning something new every day, but I think those little mini victories, those little Stanley Cups along the way kind of help you kind of know how to navigate the big picture, which is, kind of the game of business, life, whatever. So
it's so right. I think I do this work, Mike, because of a similar set of experiences. I remember once, and I had a global team at the time, and I was patting myself on the back for, my ability to build this really high performing global team and be a good leader. And at that time, I'm inside a business. I'm running a learning and development and leadership development function. But at the same time, we integrated with another business at the time. They brought these consultants in and they pulled all our teams together, doggone consultants. And then they spent the first half of the day asking my team about all the ways that I sucked. And then the second half of the day they spent with me in the room, sharing those with me off of flip charts that covered all the walls. And it was one of the most frustrating and meaningful experiences I've ever had, because you had to resist. First of all, you had to resist because the consultant was around, the impulse to say the wrong thing when people were essentially telling you all the ways that you weren't very good. And then I just got stuck in this space where I thought, why didn't these people tell me? And that's where I realized I didn't ask the right questions. I didn't go seek ways to improve. I didn't go look for their thoughts on what I was doing well and what I was. And I started doing that in a really aggressive way. First, I called everybody on my team into my office and said, why didn't you tell me? And what can I do in the future so that you're comfortable doing that? What kind of conversations do we need to have? How do I need to stay up to speed on whether I am improving in some of these areas that I really want to be good at? And clearly I'm not yet, despite the fact that I thought I was. Right. And that's a big revelation for most leaders. And today I see people living in that space and I want to help them get out of it, because you don't have to.
Yeah. I have had that almost exact experience. And I've also had it where
miserable.
It is. It's a little, I mean, it sounds bad, but it hurts your feelings because you're like, wait, what?
Badly.
How did I not know this? And you kind of, you wish you could take back time and fix it, but all you can do is pick yourself up.
Yes. What you do next matters. Right.
But I was going to say, I had it also where, once I got to the point where I felt I had a good understanding of myself and my leadership skills and at least where I was at, even when I would have my own reviews, like my boss would review me, I could tell when he was swinging in the dark on, that's like, I'm not going to not take your feedback, but I can tell you my two biggest weaknesses and you haven't even hit them yet.
Right.
And I knew that they weren't like, I didn't feel like I was getting away with something. I felt like I was getting shortchanged because my leader wasn't saying, hey, Mike, we've noticed these two weaknesses. And so I would have to almost take my lumps, learn from what I could from those experiences, and then also apply my own teachings to be like, well, they didn't call out these two items, but I know I need to work on it. Right. And it was just funny to me that I was able to recognize that at some point where I think, at the beginning, I was just taking whatever they would give me, whether it was accurate or not.
We assumed they knew better. Right. And we get to that place where we realize they don't, or they haven't done the work. Like I think about reviews and the way we do them in many organizations, and they're once a year or once a quarter, and there's all sorts of data out. Like it doesn't work that way. First of all, you don't remember what I did in July if you're reviewing me in January. You have no clue. And secondly, unless you're coaching me on a regular basis, we're not having the kind of conversations that are geared toward improvement at all. And so you've got a limited picture and you're trying to make improvement happen in some sort of an event-based way rather than a consistent path. And that doesn't work either. And so the frequent coaching conversations done well start to completely change the game for a business over these sort of event-based reviews.
So, Randy, what's your advice to business owners, people that want to further their leadership skills? I mean, again, that is a massive topic, and I think it's going to be a little different for everybody. But, I think if we're going to leave the listeners with something, I think it's that, identify where you're at in this process. And if you want to grow, if you want to evolve, and if you want to take your leadership up a notch, and then once you figure that out, where do they start?
Yeah, I guess the concept that I try to help people sort of solve that problem with the most is one I call self-leadership. And it is by creating a set of questions for yourself that you want to ask on a regular basis that helps you have thoughts you wouldn't have in a reactive way. So, for example, if you were to start each morning for what do my people need from me today? What kind of conversations can I have that might be helpful today? Where can I have influence in a way that supports somebody at being better today? What are the things that I want to do more of as a leader today? Even that will start to push you in a direction of what you move toward as leadership that's proactive rather than the fires you put out because it's reactive. Because we are not our best selves when we're reactive. That's where our impulses sort of take over. And we can't help that. We're human. As we evolved, our brain wanted us to run from the tiger or the floodwaters immediately and not worry about the quality of our running or the path we were taking. It just wanted us to get away. And so we still are stuck with some of those human conditions, right, in those moments when things are on fire. And so proactive planning about most of us have pretty good instincts about how we want to be led or what would be helpful for us. And leveraging those as to how we want to lead is really, really important. So that's one of the first things. The second thing is go extract information from your team through involvement in ways that help you reach better solutions. So if I've got a team and I feel like I have to leave them alone, I'm doing it wrong. Pull together. Guys, I don't know what to do about this. I have some ideas. I have some thoughts. I need your help. I need your input. How would you make it work? If I can just do that as a leader, start involving my team rather than talking to my team. People think that, our teams resist change if we want that. Well, people resist change done to them. They don't necessarily resist change done with them. And so if I can make that shift to my team will teach me what good leadership looks like if I go ask good questions about how do we want to solve this problem? How do we want to work together to improve this thing that we got an opportunity around? So it's proactive based leadership rather than reactive based leadership. And then the other thing that I would do is as I'm studying leadership, because candidly, and this is frustrating thing about leadership, there's a lot of bad advice out there. There's a lot of terrible, terrible advice on management out there that we get stuck with. I remember the old HR saying where it was, if you call somebody in and you have bad information, tell them something good, then tell them something bad, or the bad thing in the middle, then tell them something good again. Like we try to make people feel better rather than achieve clarity through collaboration. And this isn't about causing them to feel good it's causing them to think different. That's our opportunity. And asking them, hey, what do you think you could be better at? What are the areas that you would want to improve more in? So the second thing that I think about here is using questions to lead rather than statements or opinions or instructions. If we catch ourselves in that space where we're given statements, opinions, and instructions rather than asking good questions, we're missing an opportunity. That just moves people to their emotional side. They either agree or disagree with what you said, rather than to their cognitive brain, which is where they make choices. It's where they consider new ways of doing things. It's where they get motivated by saying, hey, if you wanted to be better in the next 30 days or improve in some way that you were proud of, what would you work on? Like, that's how we want to think about leadership. Our job is not to tell people how to be better. It's to help them get there with our support. And those are two very, very different things. Sorry, I gave a lecture right there, Mike. I didn't, wasn't my intention, but
I think
it's a
that
cool
was
place to
great.
work.
And I think that was great. You touched on it. The only thing I would add, again, I would love to hear your thoughts on it, is that if you practice open dialogue with your team on a daily basis, those tough conversations aren't so tough anymore.
That's right. No, you're dead on.
If you don't talk to them during the week or you don't talk to them throughout the month and all of a sudden 90 days into it, you have to have that tough conversation. Well, you're dropping a bomb on a stranger. You don't want to, that's hard.
Right.
So if you get to know these people, you have open dialogue and you build some sense of, open door conversation, trust. When you do have to correct or you do have to teach or you do have to educate, it's not that hard.
That's right. I've got a balanced approach, and that's tougher now in the remote world than it used to be. And I hear a lot of managers talking about that. I used to be able to walk around and stick my head in their door and things like that if I didn't have a remote team. Some people have always had remote teams, but for some that didn't, and that went away. And it's, our opportunity there is, okay, I have to build some new habits because this informal habit isn't there anymore. If my toothbrush broke, I wouldn't just wish I'd go get another toothbrush that I could use. And we kind of got to do the same thing here, right? So we got to plan for those on, using technology or Zoom calls or whatever else we do to interact with our team and say, hey, let's have, these 10-minute conversations where we can just touch base on what's going well, what isn't, what can I do more of, what can I do less of, where can I help, where do you need some thoughts from me on something that you're working on? What do we collaborate around? To your point, consistency is important. And that's where trust comes from, is I think this person has my best interest at heart. And if they only talk to me once a month or once a quarter or once a year, they don't know what my best interest is, and they haven't found out. So it does completely change the game. Man, I can call somebody out that I've got a relationship with in ways that I can. I brought somebody in my office once and I said, look, you could be amazing, but you aren't yet. And I know you can be, but you're not there. And I'm not sure you're making progress. What do you want to do next? And how can I help? And I can get away with that. I can have that conversation with somebody that I've invested in, but I can't have that conversation if people feel like you're just being manipulated by someone who wants them to do different things for the betterment of the manager. Right. So it's an excellent point.
Well, Randy, I really appreciate the conversation. Like, I could geek out on leadership stuff all day long.
Me too, as you can tell.
It's such an interesting topic, and there's a lot of ways to approach it. There's a lot of ways to be successful at it and fail at it. And I think, it would be a 5-hour podcast if we started swapping good or bad stories, but
easily.
I appreciate the time and I appreciate the conversation on leadership, and we will share your links and everything within the show notes so people can follow along and kind of learn a little bit more about what you do.
Thanks, Mike. It's been a pleasure. I have one of the best jobs on the planet, and it's fun to talk about it and share it with people. So thanks for the opportunity.
Awesome. Thanks. If you'd like to learn more about CyberDogs, share your thoughts, or even ask a specific question about this episode and or the brand Retro Mindset, contact me directly at mike@cyberdogsmarketing.com.